Okay, so now we have just left Vietnam. We started off doing a quick study at policy in the United States, incentives and Freakonomics and tragedy of the commons and Maslow's hierarchy. And we pulled in the case study example of Denmark and how it's the happiest country. And now we are going to be going from Japan to China to Vietnam. And today's class on administrative policy, corruption, economic development focuses on on Singapore. As we've been going along in this class, we have this sort of Goldilocks approach in some ways. That's not the intention, but we find in each country things that are very admirable and appealing and advantageous to better economic development and better lifting people out of poverty and better risk management and all that. We also find things that are the trade-offs involved, maybe a more authoritarianism in China, less the rule of law, less freedoms. Definitely, since we left Japan, Vietnam, and China, a recurrent theme is that for a well-ordered society in China and Vietnam, that individual freedoms are curtailed, and you're seeing this happen real time in Hong Kong. And this brings us to maybe the most interesting case study of the whole semester in terms of different cultures converging, different trade-offs being made that sort of mix several of the features of society that we like, but also are not familiar with in Western societies, and that's Singapore. And we just left Vietnam, and Vietnamese officials openly admire Singapore. It basically has one-party rule. That's been uninterrupted for 55 years, the People's Action Party. It's not communist, but it's authoritarian. And yet the difference is Singapore has gotten to be the wealthiest country in the world per capita with minimal corruption, some of the lowest levels of corruption in the world. And there are high levels of corruption in Vietnam, and there are high levels of corruption in China. Singapore has really low levels, far lower than corruption levels in the United States. If you want to read sort of a definitive account of, or one of the definitive accounts about how Singapore became this miracle, this exceptional story of going from extraordinary poverty, isolation, and vulnerability in 1965, after they ceased to be a British colony and they were ejected by Malaysia and they're on their own. This is the book From Third World to First by Lee Kuan Yew. And it's often referred to as the Singapore exception. Maybe many of you have seen the movie Crazy Rich Asians set in Singapore. And these are photos of just the Marina Bay in Singapore, which is futuristic. And if you're into environmental planning and conservation and urban development with green enhancements, trees, flora and fauna that make the quality of life better, you can't help but be so impressed by Singapore. And these are just photographs. Singapore is Asian Wakanda. It's truly futuristic. And again, this has become a trendy thing in urban design, architecture, and planning, is building in the built environment room for nature. And Singapore does it as well as any place you've ever seen. Let me show you real quick, just a little clip that shows how impressive it is.
There is one city where that idea is being applied on a major scale: Singapore. 2 million trees have been planted here in the last 45 years. This city is now richer in species than any other in the world. And this practice extends to all parts of the city. The waterways have been cleaned up and smooth-coated otters are coming back. But perhaps the most spectacular example of city greening is this grove of super trees. These 150 feet high metal structures are now full of life. Creepers have been planted to grow over the outermost branches. This is a new urban world that we have now designed and built with others in mind. Create the space and the animals will come. Is this a vision of our cities of the future? It could be possible to see wildlife thriving within our cities across the planet.
So if you, I've said this before in class, and we talked about China, but if you want to see the future, desalinization plants for water purification, the built environment for physical activity, drone deliveries, the greening of urban life, Singapore is the place to go. It's unparalleled. Now, having said that, we have to segue quickly to something else that people often know about Singapore, which is, and this is the part that is that balance, that it has extraordinary economic opportunities, one of the safest places to be, and it has a level of authoritarianism, corporal punishment, rigid judicial enforcement that is alien to most Westerners. And Michael Fay was the son of an American diplomat in 1994 who he went out and spray painted cars, did property damage, got caught, spent time in prison, and was caned 4 times. And if you watch the video about how shocked Americans were, President Clinton beseeched Singapore's leader not to do it. And it is somewhat admirable that the Singapore leader said, look, these are the rules that apply to all the people in Singapore, and why would we make an exception? Think of the bad incentives that would set, that if you're an American, you're not held to the same rules as the Singaporeans. And so they didn't, and they caned him. And just for as a thought experiment, we have property damage, we have stuff, shenanigans that go on at every college. And when property damage is done, people on a dorm, they all have to pay on that floor. And we just finished China a couple of weeks ago. It might be worth thinking about. What if you had Chinese level surveillance for safety at U of R to prevent property damage, and you mixed it with a little bit of caning? You wouldn't have to do a lot of caning for COVID violations, for other serious infractions at U of R. And again, it's totally alien. You can put this picture in there. It looks so bizarre. But it's a cultural difference between many Asian societies and countries and Western societies that find this barbaric. Corporal punishment of this nature is still done in Indonesia and Saudi Arabia, and it's not done often in Singapore, but it is still done. And they have the death penalty for massive drug trafficking and murder. And then you read the article about how, Singapore, I'm a broken record in this class. China, Vietnam, and now Singapore, and Taiwan and South Korea are functioning societies again. They have, no one's fully beaten COVID, but COVID now is a very small part of their daily existence because Singapore and its universities, China everywhere, and Vietnam throughout its country got very aggressive about containing this virus, and they curtailed freedoms on a massive level. And the payoff is that they don't have the proportional level of 500,000 people dead in their society as we have in the United States. We're at level red at the University of Richmond. At UVA, it's even, just as bad. They had a spike last week. And our freedoms are being inhibited and restricted because we haven't curtailed COVID. We haven't managed and controlled this. We're playing catch up all the time. And so the mental health consequences of isolation and distancing are significant in the United States and elsewhere. And that's part because we so hold up the model of personal freedom that we don't get control of this virus. The students at Singapore said you just wouldn't see 500 people at a party with loud music and drunk. It wouldn't even happen in normal times. We don't have this militant, we must have freedom approach that the West has. So they use technology in their culture and enforcement. And so payoff for them is their economy is growing. People are back living a semi-normal life, and they're going to be back to a normal life before we are. Here's Singapore, just to kind of give you a physical idea of where it rests. And you can see why the British wanted to have bases in Hong Kong, Singapore. And Hong Kong and Singapore are maybe the two exceptions to colonialism, where colonialism overall was a net benefit. British invested in Hong Kong, Singapore as key nautical points in their trade routes from China through Southeast Asia to India and back to England. And Singapore is this extraordinary story that got rid of its colonial oppressors, but kept the parts of colonialism that were valuable for them, mainly. And just look at just the stratospheric increase in wealth per capita. And richer than Hong Kong, United States, Japan, richer than any other country per capita up there with Luxembourg. And they're one of the easiest places to do business. The United States here, Singapore outperforms us there. And you can see places that it's best to do business. New Zealand, number 1, Singapore, number 2, Hong Kong, South Korea. The United States is high up there, and the places where doing business is terrible and virtually impossible. But part of the Singapore exception is the fact that it kept some aspects of colonialism that played out well, and the chief among them is maintaining English as the default governmental language. And residents of Singapore all learn English, which allows them to excel in the global economy, which uses English as the default language. But then also, everyone in Singapore who lives there is required to learn their mother tongue, whether it be Mandarin or Tamil, Indian, or Malay. And that means they're all bilingual. So much of the success of Singapore can be attributed to just the great man theory of history is overdone, but sometimes there are people that come along. Nelson Mandela is one in South Africa. Martin Luther King in some ways in the United States. Just one individual person comes along at the right time, at an appropriate time, and their impact is just unparalleled. And Lee Kuan Yew, who ranked first in his class at Cambridge University and yet still felt the prejudice that he wasn't English. He was almost killed by Japanese soldiers, World War II. Grew up with a very, very strong sense of not being talked down to by Westerners in a racist way, but also at the same time realizing that any individual in any country's future requires a minimum level of power to protect yourself and wealth, which is part of that. And so while he greatly admired China and Deng Xiaoping, he was never going to take sides for China against the United States. He was going to be independent and taking, from his perspective, the best aspects of all cultures, especially East and West. And of course, the more you study Singapore and Lee Kuan Yew, you can't help but think of Machiavelli. And the need, if you're going to have a structured, safe society, you have to have law and order. You need to have a strong state. And so Singapore is often referred to as Disneyland with the death penalty. And according to Lee Kuan Yew, it's great to have human rights. Of course you want human rights. He was a big believer in human rights. He was an anti-communist through and through. But he also thought that in some ways, Western societies had sort of given not enough attention to human responsibilities, also equally as important. And if you're going to have a Bill of Rights, you should also have a Bill of Responsibilities. Singapore reflects that. Very, very low levels of corruption. This is the formula for corruption. It's how much power you have plus how much discretion you have as a person minus accountability. So if you have a lot of power and you're discreet, so you don't flaunt it, and there's zero accountability, then you're going to have a lot of corruption. Conversely, if you have power and whatever your level of discretion, if you have a lot of accountability, then you don't get corruption. And that accountability is the key point. There is so much accountability in the Singapore system. Authoritarianism is an extreme form of accountability. But that's also why it's one of the least corrupt countries in the world. It's so humbling that the United States is not even in this list. And another part of Singapore society that is fascinating, maybe somewhat clumsy, is its absolute seriousness and intentionality of racial harmony. If you guys click on this great video, they had race riots in 1964 between Malays and ethnic Chinese. And they knew that that's human nature, is to be tribal and to be antagonistic to other groups if you feel like you're being screwed or you don't have a chance or it's not fair. And so they have been hyper intentional about their housing, about representation, about the laws that they have, that they do not allow for racism. They don't allow for offending other people's religion. They set up housing policies so that people all live mixed racially in the housing that is some of the best housing in the world. So you can click on this and see how they have been extremely proactive in having people live together, have their kids go to the same schools. And while it's not perfect, people are people, you have to, again, admire the fact that they don't just give lip service. In the United States, you get so much lip service and signaling and woke posturing about addressing the legacies of racism and disparities and vastly different amounts of privilege. But what can you point to in the United States that is intentional and proactive in trying to address those things? What is tangible? I mean, good. Maybe you could think of affirmative action. That might be something. But you can't point to a lot where the U.S. government or any other strong entity in the United States actually goes about trying to address disparities and privilege disparities and the ingredients that lead to racism and bigotry. Now, one of the things that's going to make Singapore's efforts harder and harder in terms of trying to promote racial harmony is the fact that there's just so much more intermarriage among racial groups and racial and religious groups in Singapore. And as more and more people marry other people of different religious backgrounds, different racial backgrounds, over time, using those categories, Malay, Chinese, Indian, and Eurasian, it's going to be harder to be valid because people are going to be so mixed, which in some ways is really, it's actually kind of what you want. You very much want, it's a very, very encouraging trend that people become less defined by their groups and see people, as they should. But intermarriage is maybe the ultimate form of that principle, and it leads to a more multiracial society by virtue of, not by quotas or housing, but just by people. It's really encouraging. You can see this, if you want to see one state in the United States that's the closest to this, go to Hawaii. There is no one racial majority group. There's so much intermarriage in a sense, everybody's a minority in Hawaii, but nobody's a majority. And it doesn't solve all racial problems and racism, but it helps. It goes a long way towards addressing the problems of there ever being a majority around which all the defaults in society revolve. Real quickly, other Singapore features worth noting: unlike China, Vietnam, and Japan, Singapore supports its workers through labor unions and collective bargaining. Now, that doesn't mean they permit strikes. They don't. It doesn't mean that it's a Bernie Sanders workers' paradise. It isn't. But what's interesting is they don't just let the free market go unfettered. They know that for Singapore to work, workers have to make enough. They can't be exploited. And one individual worker negotiating with a company is just not going to be powerful enough. They'll always be trampled. And so they have collective bargaining agreements. They have arrangements where members of government and employers and workers and unions collectively bargain on wages relative to increases in productivity and profitability so that Singapore is more livable. And Singapore uses a progressive wage model to support lower income workers in the cleaning, landscape, security, and retail sectors. And from the United States, these are sectors where a lot of workers don't make a lot of money, but they work really hard. And our society depends on them. In Singapore, they know that, and they go the next step, which is they support those workers with increases in wages where they can. In the United States, we just let them fend for themselves. Singapore also requires individuals save every month 20% of their income to meet retirement, housing, and healthcare needs. I think if you talk to most financial planners, they would love for this to be a law in the United States, that Americans were forced to save 20% every month for these things and just for a rainy day fund for when bad things happen in life, which they inevitably do. You can say this is oppressive and authoritarian, but it's like a benevolent paternalism. People should save, right? We should help workers in their negotiations. We should help people with housing, to afford housing, especially when you own the house, is a great investment in human capital, and it helps people get up Maslow's hierarchy. Now, all of this is coupled with extreme limits on free expression, free speech, peaceful assembly. You can't criticize the government. You can't have meetings of political protest that aren't registered, and you can't really have them. And so Singapore's approach to individual liberties and freedoms looks a little more like Vietnam and China. It's not outright communist. They don't have the level of surveillance that China exercises, but they have a very strong pushback on any person who wants to complain about the government. Now, if you watch the video, they still have the speaker's corner for people who want to, voice their discontent and frustration. And not many people go, and it's not super. It's just not a big deal. If you were to go to Singapore, there are migrant workers there that work there who aren't Singapore citizens, and I think it's fair to say that they're exploited, and the government doesn't like a lot of attention paid to that. But it's a part of their society that they depend on workers, like the United States depends on workers who are not citizens to do a lot of the work in our country that Americans don't want to do, and Singapore has the same dynamic. In closing, the whole Lee Kuan Yew case study is fascinating because it raises the fundamental question of what is the ultimate purpose of government? What's the point? And boy, you got to be thinking about that in the United States in the last 4 years and recently. Like, what is the point of all of this activity in Washington and elsewhere? Is it just to gain attention? Is it to foment grievances and to win re-election? What if every member of the Senate, the House of Representatives, and state houses, and what if Donald Trump had woken up every day and say, what is the purpose of government? What if they had said what Lee Kuan Yew says it is? It's the ultimate test of a political system is whether it improves the standard of living for the majority of people. And that is refreshing because that really is, in a sense, the primary purpose of government is to do that which individuals can't do for themselves, for the safety and the protection and the advancement of large groups of people, to avoid the tragedy of the commons, to help people develop their human potential. And look at how much Singapore, it has the highest, it is the number one place for the share of its citizens who reach their top human potential. It's also the wealthiest. So you can see the correlation here that the countries that develop the most of their citizens' potential also are the wealthiest. It's a feedback loop. Now, one little wrinkle here at the end of all this is that Singapore is not, by this happiness score, not the happiest place. Right? I guess happiness is not just your wealth. It's also the freedom to make life choices. It's generosity and philanthropy. It's freedom. Freedom is a part of this too. It's not just how long do you live, it's how well do you live. And it's interesting that Singapore is ranked 31st, right? It's quite a ways down there. And the United States is, I guess, happier, even though it's not as wealthy. We don't have as much development. These are sort of 9 reasons if you review blogs and other posts about living in Singapore is that everything's a competition. It's so grinding. I mean, it's intoxicating if you're up for it. And it definitely leads to a lot of advancements and innovation and wealth and competition. We love competition, but oftentimes we'd rather view a competition than constantly be in a competition. And then also part of being in a competition is everything can lead towards elitism, right? Everybody knows their ranking, and it's a society that's hyper fixated on rankings and attainment and wealth. It has the highest per capita number of millionaires. Again, if you're up for that, if you love that, if you're drawn to that, great. Not everybody is. There's not as much freedom to be yourself. Again, a strong, like Japan in some ways and China, strong forces of conformity to the larger collective good. High cost of living, the year of national service. A lot of young people find all of these things it makes relationships difficult. If you're always in competition in an elite environment and you're expected to conform and please your families, and you have to go serve the military for a year, it's no surprise that a good number of young people are like, mental health isn't taken as seriously in Singapore as it is other places. And hence you have, in many ways, more common feelings of alienation and loneliness and isolation and strong family pressures. Similar dynamic in Singapore that we saw in Japan of presenteeism, where workers can't leave the office because the boss is still in the office, and they can't be shamed that they're the first ones to leave or they're leaving before the boss. And yet, how often have you been working on a project where the best thing you could do, the wisest thing, is to close it down for the night, go out, get a nice meal, have a little social time, connect with a human being, get a good night's sleep, come back the next morning at 6 or 7, and be a lot better of a worker on whatever that project is. And so this is the same dynamic of posturing and signaling that you're a hard worker, even at the point at which that work is not going to be that valuable, is a problem in Singapore. It's a cultural thing. And this is in conclusion, you know, in our Goldilocks journey of looking at different countries and finding things we think are better and so forth, you know, maybe some places are like colleges in big cities like New York. They're super necessary and valuable. Your country needs them. You need to go to them, but you don't need to live there your whole life. They're good for tourism. They're good for a chapter of your life, a season of your life. I know from personal experience that I was in Washington for a while. I was in the Bay Area in California for a while, and I've lived in London and parts of Australia, but in Sydney, but only for a year or two at most, in my experience. And I've had colleagues who do it maybe 3 or 4 years, maybe college for 4 years, and you get the benefits that are only in those metropolitan areas of extraordinary competition and advancement and big universities and companies. And yet you wouldn't necessarily want to live there. That raising a family isn't always ideal in those places. It's the Richmonds, it's the mid-sized towns that actually, once you've extracted what you needed to get from the big cities and the colleges you go to, the real place for the quality of living. In that sense, go live for a year in Singapore, but live your life in Denmark, right? Go to New York City for college, or go to Boston, but then live in Richmond. And then, of course, Singapore and Denmark give us that fascinating comparison of, this is a wealthier, more powerful, innovative, entrepreneurial, rich place, but this is a happier place. And maybe people there overall have a higher quality of life because of the way life is structured. And for every person, they'll have to calculate what to them and how they measure utility and happiness is a better fit for them. Denmark has more freedoms of expression and association and human rights and liberties. Singapore has less, but Singapore has maybe more dynamism and innovation, and they have more wealth. So just something to think about as we continue. And then we'll be starting our next class on another absolutely fascinating country to study on its own right, and especially in contrast to China. We'll be starting India in our next class. So see you there.